So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jessica Martinez, and I'm here with Enlace Comunitario, and then I have my coworker,
Cristian Aguilar, I'm one of the case managers here at Enlace.
So if this is your first time joining us, we are having these sessions to discuss with you guys how we utilize the Allstate Foundation and Moving Ahead curriculum. So thank you so much for joining us. This is our second session. And if you could type in on the chat where you guys are, what city you guys are from, maybe the agency, so we can know and get to know you guys a little bit better. If you have any questions at any point, please chat them in, or if and Terry or Rachel will help us address those questions so we could make sure that we give you guys the information that you guys are needing or clarify anything that you guys might want. So we could go ahead and get started. And we wanted to kind of have a recap to those of you who maybe did not join us on the first session. And we wanted to talk a little bit of what we covered the first session, and that was on module 1. And some of the things that we covered on that module was very basic information that I'm pretty sure maybe some of you guys are already utilizing with your survivors. And if not, maybe getting some techniques on how can you guys start utilizing or modify what you guys are using. And what we kind of talked about is the financial abuse. What is that? How does that look at when you're working with survivors? We know that 99% of survivors are affected and experience some type of financial abuse when they are in a abusive relationship. So it's something that it's important for us to talk about when we are working with survivors, because we know that this is something that is happening. So talk about safety when your survivors come to your agency. And safety planning. So the first thing when you're working with survivors is always thinking about their safety and see how can we support them. And safety is could look different to every survivor that you're working. So it's not something that fits all. It's individualized, that it might be very different for one survivor to the other. So we kind of talked about and the importance of addressing those things when survivor first gets to your agency. It's important for us to discuss with survivors every time that they're coming to our agency, help them identify the difference between a relationship where they're experiencing financial abuse and what a healthy relationship might look like. Because many times our survivors have grown up with mixed messages about finance, and they might have a hard time connecting that information on what they might think is normal and what they think is not financial abuse. So it's important to kind of go over that information with them and kind of like highlight what is normal and what's not. Many times we've had survivors where we work with when they say that they grew up with a parent who always took control over the finance, and they think that that's normal. So kind of like inform them that when you're in a committed relationship, both individuals have the same say on what the finance and a say on that. So it's important to kind of like highlight that and go over with them on that information. The module also kind of goes over, again, safety planning and how that looks different to everybody. To some survivors, it might be having to make a decision on leaving the home. So how does that safety look for them? How to prepare them for that step? Gathering important information like documents, thinking about maybe the legal system if they need an order of protection. Get familiar with your local resources. We're in Albuquerque, so we are very familiar with the court system here, how to process those orders of protection. We are familiar with the Albuquerque Family Advocacy Center. It's kind of like a hub agency where they have all these other agencies that help with orders of protections, get connected with New Mexico legal aid, that they could also assist with orders of protection hearings. So getting to know your local resources and connecting survivors with these agencies, if for somehow your agency does not provide that legal assistance, is important as advocates on helping survivors through this process. And that module also kind of goes over like divorce, custody, and what is that entitled, like knowing the pro se process if somehow the advocate is the survivor is not able to hire a private attorney. How does that look like? How can you help them advocate for themselves and navigate the court system? So in a nutshell, that's kind of like what we went over on the first module. Towards maybe the last on our sixth session, if you guys have any questions and you would like for us to kind of like talk a little bit more on how we're doing that type of work with our survivors here at Enlace, you could chat in your questions, or maybe we could on the last session, I think we're having 5 more sessions or 4, we could answer that information. But I don't know if anybody has any question kind of on what I went over or any comments.
As we wait for those questions and comments, I just wanted to welcome everybody that's on Facebook. If you are interacting with us, please place your comments and questions in the chat. As mentioned earlier, we really want this to be as interactive as possible for those that are joining us this morning. And if you are joining us on the Zoom webinar, please also feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat. We will be doing polls that will be facilitated during the Zoom session. And so we hope to get your responses through there, but if you all need anything, please let us know.
So we have we want to do more of an interactive. There's a question on the chat. Good morning. Have a copy of presentation, the key points you mentioned, case. I missed the first one. We do have some points on from the first one that we can email to you guys. So this session, we want to do it more as a interaction. If you guys have any questions, any comments, if you guys have anything, we want the feedback as well. So we're going to start with some questions, and you guys can type your answers on the chat. And the first one is, how comfortable are you with your own finances? Like, how are your finances? Are you comfortable about talking about your finances? Are you comfortable about knowing how much money do you have, about your?
So I think it's gonna be I think it's a poll, isn't it a poll?
It is. Folks have been chiming in as they came in. If you don't see the poll right when you came up, it looks like we have most people who have responded. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll unless anybody was thinking about their answer. If you want to take one more second to select it, and if not, I'll share the results now. Are you seeing that, Jessica and Christian?
No, we're not seeing the.
Terry, are you or are other participants able to see the results of the poll?
Yes, so we have, it might have just popped up behind your screen, but we do have, on a scale from 1 to 5, how comfortable are you with your own finances? So those chiming in on Facebook, you're more than welcome to put that in the chat as well, or comment box, even though you're not part of the poll necessarily. So we do have 14% or that said on a scale from 1 to 5, 1, and we have 5 or 71% saying 3, and we have again 1 person or 14% saying 4.
So you see that poll just it kind of shows us that having these conversations, even for applying it to us, might be difficult. So how can we have these conversations to survivors that might have the same messages that we heard, or we might not feel comfortable? So it's kind of like important to kind of for as an advocates, we might not know everything. but like knowing the basics on finance and being able to support clients on survivors on this process is important, and having those conversations about finance, because it's not easy. It's not easy for us to just like we're humans, to anybody, and just like knowing that survivors face the same situation. So then we have another question or another poll. How comfortable are you talking with survivors about finances? Kind of like similar what it kind of went over on a scale from 1 to 5.
Carry that poll, when I go to try to find it, it's just the results of the other poll. Did you load both of those? Should I find it someplace else?
Yes, so at the top where it says Untitled poll, you'll drop down to the second one.
Thank you. Got it. It takes a village sometimes on a Zoom training. Thank you. All right, here we are. This is the next poll. I'll give folks just a few more seconds to think it through, and then we'll end the poll and share the results. Terry, would you like to share those results again?
Sure, absolutely. All right, so this next question is on a scale from 1 to 5. How comfortable are you talking with survivors about finances? So 40% chose 2, 40% chose 3, and 20% chose 5.
Okay, I think this one looked a little bit better in a way. And it's the same thing, you know, like probably because we don't as adults, we don't know much about finances. We grew up in a home that we don't talk about finances. Talking about finances was not allowed in the table. So we don't feel comfortable talking about it. But I think this is then why it's necessary to take these kind of classes. Read through the financial literacy class. I love this book. I have one copy at my house because I think it covers a lot of things. So it's important for us to know our finances, to know how to talk about our finances. One thing is that I can see it this way. If I feel comfortable about talking about, obviously not my finances, how much money I have in my bank account, right? But how I budget. Simple as that. If I know how to budget, I think I'm gonna teach my clients how to budget, how to create a budget list. So it's very important for us to take control of our finances. It's the same way. You cannot be a caseworker. You cannot be someone working with clients if your emotional stability is not okay. The same way with the finance. How can we talk about finance to someone if we don't understand that? It's easy to teach about finances when you know the subject, when you know how to open a bank account, and these things are so simple. And nowadays we can learn about anything. YouTube, social media. There's so many ways that we can learn about finances. So that will be your encouragement to learn about finances here and there through YouTube classes, financial literacy classes, all over social media.
And it might be like Christian said, to some of us, it might be uncomfortable, but let's learn together. If we don't feel comfortable and we know that a survivor does not how to open a bank account, okay, let's call together. Or maybe you do it when the survivor is not there, but let's call, let's figure out how can we do this? What does the survivor need? It like Christian said, it's not easy, but we need to start somewhere. And it's important to provide these tools to survivors who are trying to get out of an abusive relationship or want to regain control over their finance and their life. So these little things or little steps that might seem insignificant for others, it might seem like the world to a survivor, and it might make a difference on their goals, on how they want to move forward with their life and to provide for them and for their kids. So our intention is the curriculum is an awesome curriculum. Some of the information might not pertain to the survivor that you're working, and that's fine, but like it does have good material. It's very simple to understand. It's as we go through the different sessions that we have, like I said, some information might not apply and it might be difficult for me to go over it, and you might not need it because maybe the survivor might not be at that stage where they need that information. But it's good to provide that information, share it with them, what's appropriate for their situation in that moment. We have another poll question. Why is it important to budget with the survivor?
And for this question, if people either want to come off mute or type in the chat, your answer, it's not so much a 1 to 5, but when we think about budgeting with survivors, why is it something that we just basically to consider? Why is it something that we should be doing with them, talking about budgeting with survivors? And feel free to just unmute or put it in the chat. We have Help Empower Them from Cherie from the New Mexican Asian Family Center.
Yes.
Just to add to that comment, unless you want to come off and say anything further, unmuted, Cherie, about that. No pressure either way, but I think I appreciate that piece of, I remember talking with survivors and they're like, no one has ever talked to me about this before. It's their first time, and not so much just even the information, but I think what they were really expressing was, no one's ever treated me like someone who could talk about this, like that piece. I think it felt like a show of respect to be talking with them about money, We also have from another participant, we want to support them and help them be successful. Thanks, Molly.
Awesome. And just like you said, Rachel, sometimes survivors might not see beyond their current situation. And I, when going over the different financial modules with survivors, sometimes when I covered certain information, they were like, you know what, I've never thought about that. I've never thought about opening an account. I never thought about budgeting. I never thought that I could save that extra $5 or $10. So we're just opening and unraveling all this information to them that they never thought that they could do it on their own.
And like you mentioned earlier, it's about making the steps with them. If they don't know how to open a savings account or a checking account, what's the steps? Go online and check the steps to open an account. And let them know that obviously we know that the budgeting system is so important. That is the base, right, of our financial stability. Because if we don't know how to control our expenses, it's going to be difficult in the long run. That's the reason, and I really like how in the financial literacy and in the book and at the end of the module, there's a table, right, about how to do that, the budgeting, and it's really simple. And clients don't understand how simple it is, or we don't even understand how simple it is until we have it in paper, until we have it in front of us. Oh, this is what it is. Like how much I spend on little things here and there. Right now, we know that there's a lot of apps on our phones that we can control our finances, or budget. There's one in particular, and most of them are free. We don't even have to pay for those apps, but our clients don't know. And it's okay for us to have it on our phone and show the clients, this app it's amazing so you can have a budget. You can enter all your expenses. You can enter all of your income. And that way, at the end of the month, you'll have the graphics, how much you spend and how much is your income, and where at the end of the month, you're going to know where the next month you're going to be able to cut some of those extra expenses. So little things like that we can teach our clients is going to make a huge impact. And I think that's the reason why it's so important to have a budgeting.
And we kind of already dived into like module 2. The module 2 tool covers financial management, budgeting and savings, assets and liabilities, and different banking options. And kind of like this module 2, the main focus is like budgeting, with Christian said. And if you guys don't feel comfortable with your own finances, I would encourage you guys just do that worksheet, and you're like, oh, I didn't know I have this money left over. Oh, I noticed that I'm spending too much on this. Maybe I could save. So it helped me when I kind of went over with a survivor. I did it afterwards, and it does help. It has a lot of good information. And just like we've been kind of talking about, it's going over with survivors on like budgeting and talking about how does that look like with them. Sometimes we are humans, and sometimes we have our own biases, and when a survivor comes into our office and tells us, I'm struggling with paying my rent, or I don't have money to pay my utilities or purchase this for my child. And then we see that their priorities might be other things. Like, I don't know, maybe coming with the brand new bag. Survivors, we said, it's different. Finance and talking about money, it's a very touchy subject, and having those conversations on prioritizing expenses. What are needs and what are wants? What is something that a survivor needs in order to continue on with their life, paying their rent, utilities, children's needs, and then things that they want, that maybe if they had that extra money that they could purchase those things. And then, like I said, it's important to kind of go over that so they could see. And sometimes we even take out a piece of paper and we draw or we write, okay, this is what you need, and what is it that you think that you want, but maybe that you cannot afford. Because sometimes it might seem something that they need versus what they want. So having like a visual for them, and we do this when we're talking about opening a savings account or a checkings account, to getting it kind of like, okay, maybe that Starbucks coffee that I purchase every day, I don't know, $7, $5, maybe I could buy the bag and it's gonna be cheaper, and I could save, I don't know, $10 a week or whatever the amount is. And they could see a visual that, you know what, yes, maybe I'm not gonna be able to save the $100 that I think I could, but I could save 5 or 10 or whatever the amount might be. Or maybe I could save because I wanna register for a class and I wanna pay for this, or something that they feel that will help them as they move forward with their life. The module 2 kind of also talks about, because when we're thinking about opening a savings account or budgeting or checking, we think that the survivor has to be working. And we could also have these conversations with individuals that might just be getting public assistance, that they might be getting TANF, or they might be getting child support or Social Security. I know that the amount that they're getting per month is not like if they were to hold a job, but they could also kind of like start thinking about that should not limit them from considering saving or thinking about long-term goals for them. So you could also have those conversations. It's also important to kind of like talk about, if they're not receiving any of these assistance and they qualify for these assistance, okay, let's get them connected, let's help them apply. Maybe they could apply for TANF. If they're paying full fee for daycare, maybe they're not aware because, I don't know, they might be undocumented here and they don't know that their children have a right to receive public assistance. Like, get them connected with CYFD childcare assistance. Like, let's get them connected with WIC, food stamps, Medicaid, all these programs, so they could have their basic needs met. And prepare them for that, like what if they're going to be applying for these type of programs, like what is it that they need, what documents, what proof of income or documentation they will need in order to help them with this process. And sometimes it might take for us to call or go with them. I don't know, with COVID, we have so much limitations. Before we used to go with survivors to the ISD office and help them if they don't know the language or if they were afraid or felt intimidated with the process, learn, maybe we could do the application online if they come to the office, and as long as they bring the documents, how can we help them through that process? And like we said, working through a budget, and so they could see on a visual, have a visual, okay, this is how much money I get per month. This is what I need to pay every month, my rent, my daycare. I need to put gas in the car so I could get to work. So they could identify what are fixed expenses and what are flexible expenses, because there's a difference on those. So the module also goes and describes and gives you examples of what those look like. So it kind of helps you. Don't feel that you're gonna be like just talking about all this with survivors and don't know what you're talking about. It also talks about emotional spending and how does that look like, and kind of like importance of like talking and going over with survivors, because we know when survivors come to your office, their emotions are everywhere. Somebody might be depressed, a lot of anxiety, and dealing with the trauma. So how are they coping with all these emotions? Do we need to encourage them or refer them to our support groups, to individual counseling to help with deal with those emotions? Because sometimes if we're feeling I don't know, sad or very happy, our comfort might be going to the store and spending that last $20 that I have, and that might prevent me from paying for my gas or for my daycare or something that I might need it. So how can we help survivors go through these and have these conversations on these, and help them identify when they're feeling this way and what alternative things they could do to, if this is something that's happening, that could also help them through the process. And I always ask, when I'm working with survivors and I'm going over this module, I'm like, before you're spending, when we're doing the budget, I'm like, okay, where do you see or have you identified where is it that you spend the most of your money? And they're like, oh, well, I do this or something. I like getting my nails done, or I don't know, Starbucks or something else. I always tell them, okay, before spending, ask yourself, did I compare the prices? If I like doing my nails, maybe I could buy the nail polish and I could do it for myself, and it's gonna save me more money than if I go to a nail place. Okay, and then the other question is like, do you need it? Ask yourself, do you need this item? Or is it like something that I could maybe wait? And then, can I afford it? Because sometimes we buy things and we might not afford it, we might not be able to afford it, and we just charge it to our credit card. But that money we have to pay it back. So think about that and the interest, and have those conversations with your survivor as well. And we also talk about that they could have fun without having to spend too much money. And we look into like, what is our community doing? What free events they have? I know that before, like here in Albuquerque, Explora used to have a day where families could have like a half off or a free day to go in with their children into Explora. Sometimes the zoo has like events. So looking into and providing those resources to survivors doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to do anything fun with their kids or for themselves if they're thinking about budgeting. So getting familiar with that.
And that's the important part of knowing the resources in your city. I think in Albuquerque, there's so many because we've been looking for them, because and there's more out there that we don't even know about, and not only about banking, but about those family events that we can send our clients to that are free, right? Because who doesn't like free stuff, right? As nonprofits, we do, right? So and knowing all these resources, and more than anything, is because we're teaching our clients not only to budget and to have a financial freedom, but that it's okay to have these free events, and it's really great to have a family event that we're not going to get charged for, and that it's a new thing for us, and there's always something new. even though Albuquerque it's little and I mean, not that little, but we don't have that many events, but we still have them. There's a lot of parks and recreation things that we can send our clients to. Also, this module talks about different banking accounts, different savings accounts, etc. And it's important for us as advocates to know these resources, to know what banks, because every client is going to be different. Every client is going to need a different savings account. We know that many clients probably don't have a social security number to open an account in a particular bank, but other banks, they do accept an IT number or different IDs. So that's the reason why we need to be familiar with what the banks need. I know there's what's the name of the banking program in Albuquerque? It's a brand new one for the city. With the in the website. Yeah, the Bank of Buchanan, something like that. Yeah, and it has a lot of resources. If you guys go to the website, it's amazing. It's really cool, and it tells you which bank requires a social security number or what kind of IDs you need. So that's a great resource. Use it for your clients. I use it for my clients. So I think, I think that's all it talks about this module. Also, like make sure we teach our clients that to change your password in our banking account. I don't know, every 6 months or whatever, especially on our phones. You know, when we have our apps and we have access to our banking account, it's important to change your passwords. I don't know, that I think to me that's important even with my phone, right? And I think that's what it talks about in this module. Right?
Yeah, yes, and going back to like the Bank of Albuquerque and collaborating with local institutes, financial institutes, reach out to your different credit unions or banks. Don't feel that you have to cover all this all by yourself. I could share something of what we've done in the past. So when we first started utilizing the Allstate curriculum, we're like, how are we do we need to do a workshop? Do we want to do it individual? How can we advertise this to survivors? So as the case manager team, we're like, okay, what can we do? And we decided to do kind of like a financial fair. So we reach out to different credit unions, and banks. We contact local agencies like HomeWise for first-time home buyers. We invited tax advocates because we know that a lot of our survivors might not know that they could claim the child tax credit. So we invited somebody who could talk about that. We invited Goodwill career development program where they help with working on their resumes if they want to apply for a job. They also offer like certification on specific things. So we invited them, we invited Wells Fargo, and they also talked about like how to open a bank account. So we had a little fair, they brought their little goodies, and that was a total success for us. We had over 20 participants who came and they had fun and they got all this information. And like I said, some of them have never thought about maybe buying a home, and by having that information, they're like, you know what, I think I could do it. I could work on my credit, and eventually if I save this or there's programs, I could potentially purchase a home. They got a lot of information on opening a bank account, on how to work on their resume. So try to get familiar with your local resources. Sometimes you might reach out to, I don't know, 5 credit unions and only 1 or 2 will reach out back to you. That's fine. At least have some information for them. And we also, Wells Fargo also worked very close with us. Some of the modules, they were able to come to our agency prior to COVID, and they talked about a budgeting. They brought their sheets as well. If you guys don't want to use the Allstate budget sheet, they have information that they could share with survivors. They actually did their worksheet here, and they were like, oh, okay, I could save some money. I could save $50, or I could save $5, or I could save $10. So try to utilize and tap into this your community and see how can they can help you. Like I said, we were afraid, we're like, how are we gonna go over all this information? But we've kind of identified like what are our strong points and where is it can we seek support from our community and those financial institutes that could help us provide this information. So just some thought, getting familiar with your local community.
Jessica, questions coming up for me while listening to you all speak. It's such wonderful information. And I think it really, like what you're describing, I never had a relationship with a bank or a credit union or anything like that. And being able to use that as a resource for ourselves. One of the things I really like about the way you all are talking about this in a way that the curriculum works is that it really supports us to be thinking about it for ourselves, gaining our own skills, connecting people with theirs, being, vulnerable in the same way we're asking the people we're working with in services to, I think it's helpful. When you all are working with survivors and people in your services, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what financial stability might look like for them. That can be such a broad term. And how do you think people who are transitioning out of poverty or who might be still living in poverty, but with a little bit more stability, what does financial stability look like for folks when you're working with them on this?
Financial stability looks very different to every survivor that we work with. Kind of like going back to a little bit of what I mentioned at the beginning. Sometimes it might be just having enough money to cover for the rent. Some might be helping them apply for TANF or WIC for public assistance programs. Some of them might be helping them look for a job. So it might be very different for every survivor that comes through your agency. And I could share for what we've seen here at Enlace. Everything, the priorities to every survivor is different. It might, we mentioned, it's not going to be the same. And having those conversations and kind of like going with the basic, recognizing what they're going through, that this is not something easy, that it's a process and that it's scary sometimes leaving that abusive home because the sole provider is the one that it's in charge of their finance. So sometimes it might take a little bit more extra providing that skills and knowledge to survivor that you're working with. And some survivors might get the information right away and might be on track to okay, you know what, I think I could do it. This is going to be my goal. This is what it's going to look for me and for my kids. Connecting them with your what your agency provides or the community, if they need to apply for transitional housing assistance, if they need to apply for public housing, and then helping them reach their goals on what their goals are. Because sometimes I might think when I see a survivor, sometimes I'm like, okay, they need this, they need this, they need this. But what she or he might need is totally different than what I'm envisioning for them. So really paying attention to what their needs are. And most important, acknowledge what they're feeling and that this is scary. It's scary to anybody. So I don't know, Christian, if you wanted to add a little bit more on that or.
Yeah, no, everything that you said is correct. I mean, it's listening to the survivors. Yeah, like Jessica said, it's very different for every person. Yeah, we want our goals for all of our survivors to have financial freedom and have their own home. But you know what? For them, it might be different. It might be just to pay off their $3,000 car that they got last year. Little things like that, or be able to pay their utilities on time. And we can help with that. We can, and just by encouraging them, you know what, let's open an account, let's do just little by little, and help them in those little goals that they have. And it's going to make a big impact on them. And before anything, listen, be good listeners to our survivors. Because we don't know what they're going through. It's not only the financial abuse, but it's a lot of emotional abuse, because when you don't have money, I mean, you don't have access to money in your house. I mean, it's taking away a lot of freedom. So it's important to listen to them and if they're not in counseling, encourage them to go to counseling, because again, the financial abuse is not only financial abuse, it has to be something else. So yeah, it's really important to listen to our survivors.
I love the way you're saying that, because I think so often financial literacy can feel just like a skills-based, thing that we do as advocates, versus this is part of trauma-informed healing, when we're working with people, and it involves all those same skills, that listening, the survivor-directed, empowered way of working with folks. It's not sort of just a skill we're teaching. It involves some healing, because it also involved abuse, of those finances. So I really appreciate the way that you all are framing that. And it makes me also think a little bit too about, there's the barriers to financial independence that come from the domestic violence, from the coercion and control, but also in the same way that you just painted that picture, Christian, about like how different people's experiences and circumstances are going to will dictate a different, like sort of, where they feel like their healing comes from. We work with people who also have different barriers across the systems, that it's not just always the domestic violence, and how as advocates, these other circumstances that we might need to consider that are real barriers for people when we think about accessibility to jobs, when we think about accessibility to childcare, when we think about things through a social justice and race and social justice lens in terms of like what people have access to. So I think those other, are there ways to consider other barriers beyond the domestic violence when you're doing this financial literacy work? You and I have talked some about that in the past, but I'm wondering if you would add anything to that today.
Yeah, most definitely. There's additional barriers that different communities deal with. Not knowing the language, if somebody's coming from another country, immigration status, that's a huge, not knowing rights, what are they allowed to, not knowing the court system. What else? Religion is also like a huge barrier. It's very easy sometimes to, if you know somebody like, oh, how come they just don't leave? But there's a lot of things that is around a survivor, and that it's hard to make those decisions. So it's not just like we were been going over, it's not just the financial, it's the emotional and all that other, not having a support system here in the city and the state, or even in the country. Being here alone, that's also a huge barrier, because you're like, okay, who can I rely on if I leave, especially if they might not be connected to agencies like us or like you guys. Where do they turn for help? Always living under fear of like, you have no rights here, the sole provider, and whatever you say doesn't count in this home. So there's a lot of things that we have to take in consideration with working with survivors, because we see it every day. And how can we navigate those systems and help them become their own self advocate and say and ask for help when they need it.
I think another barrier that we see here in Allstate, many of our clients come, like Jessica said, come from other countries. They don't have a social security number, they don't have an ID, and that's a big barrier. Like, to open an account, obviously you need an ID. So connecting them to the Consulado Mexicano, or to whatever country you're from, or a simple New Mexico ID. How can we get them that? It's important, and that's a big barrier. Obviously as well, the language. Many of our clients, they don't speak English, and that's one of the biggest one. Fortunately, here in New Mexico, there's a lot of people that we're bilingual, so that helps a lot. Another thing that I do think is a big barrier, it's their sexual orientation. We know that the community, the LGBTQ community, they come from a lot of barriers. When it comes to renting an apartment, like what are the barriers that they're confronting? Just because they're a trans person can obtain an apartment because how they look, or because they're from the LGBTQ community. So those things, if we see them, I'm like, no, they're not financial. Yeah, there are financial barriers. Why? Because they can't have a house. They can afford affordable or have an affordable rent because of these barriers. So we're not only going to look at the whole, like you say, it's a curriculum, we're going to go through the curriculum. No. What are the barriers that our community are confronting, and how can we help them? How can we help them cross these barriers? And then, oh yeah, we have one of someone answered the refugees population. Yes, yes, we know that how many people are coming here from other countries as refugees. Again, they don't have an ID, they don't have status. How hard is for them? If for us, as we have an ID, we have all these things, and it might be difficult to obtain all these things. Imagine for this population. I mean, sometimes we need to get out of our comfort zone and think about how are they doing it? Put their shoes on, and how are they doing it? How can we help them? How can we help them empower them? How can we empower them? How can we make them feel that they have rights? Because that's another barrier, that they think that our community think that they don't have any rights just because they don't have immigration status. They don't have right in the United States or in the States. So yeah, there's a lot of empowerment that we have to do.
And with that, like the importance of connecting with your community, local resources, getting to know other agencies. I think there's somebody here from the New Mexico Family Asian Center. See what services they offer, and part of that, connecting with survivors. El Centro de Igualdad y Derecho. They do workshops on know your rights, what to do if you were to get stopped by police. Or had an encounter with ICE. It's good to, we might not be working with specific populations, but sometimes we do have a survivor who comes into our office and they have these different needs, getting familiar with El Consulado Mexicano, New Mexico Immigrant Law Center. They do DACA citizenship, and they offer immigration attorneys as well. Like for those individuals who are coming to your city seeking asylum, can they get some type of consultation? And these agencies are more than happy to share their knowledge, just like we are. So if you are not connected with them, reach out to them and kind of have those conversations. Invite them for one of your staff meetings, or if you have multidisciplinary meetings like we do, invite them and have exchange information, come and present what do you guys do and what do we do, so we could share and we could work together as a community, because that's what we are. We might be in different cities, but I have many times where I call different places, another city in New Mexico, and I'm like, I have somebody who, can I refer them? They live closer to your area. So it's making those connections.
I just wanted to say that I really value all having this conversation about the barriers that survivors encounter, right? It's not just so easy to leave. And as we've, mentioned earlier as well, is really putting yourself in their shoes, because for many, it is hard to leave. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of choices that need to be made. And for those that are immigrant or our Latinx community that are not from here and really need those documents and ID, and for us to really work on supporting them with, financial empowerment, that's huge for a survivor. Where, in our Mexican culture, the man is the one that leads and makes the money and holds the bank account, while generally the woman stays at home. So that also is a huge barrier, right? Not knowing how to handle that. So I really appreciate having this conversation and how you all are empowering survivors to really give them that support, not only just with financial, but to also, connect them with the Consulado de Mexico to get their IDs, to get, the visa or whatever it is that they may need to really push them forward, and then teach them the steps of being financially empowered.
Yes, because when we talk about financial empowerment or financial leadership, we think just about money, but there's layers and layers behind that build up to like having these conversations, like getting to the point of, yeah, I'm ready to budget, or yes, I'm ready to go back to school or purchase a home, or just save $500 because I want to do this. So there's steps behind that. And it's important to kind of go over these things because it's the reality. This is what we're seeing.
Are there any other questions or comments from folks who are joining us today? Just to put it out there, we have a lot of, I see names from all over the state. And so if people have experiences in their own communities or a takeaway for me for today is to really think about financial empowerment beyond, just basic skills. It's working in our communities to make sure that conditions are right so that people can have a safe workplace, that they can get to that safe workplace because there's transportation, that they can use that transportation because their kid is being safely taken care of somewhere. That all these pieces are connected to a way that we can empower folks. So I appreciate that. We have another comment saying, thank you also for bringing up religious, cultural, and gender role expectations when it comes to money management. These values that come into the context of these conversations. Mhm.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments or?
We hope you all will join us again for the next session. The date and the announcement for that will be going out soon, so please keep an eye out for it. We'll be deepening the conversation and hopefully also deepening the ways we can think about our work with individuals and families, and then also what community work or relationships might be needed for us to really start to take on this work in our state. So thank you, Jessica and Christian. Thank you everyone who has participated today, and to all of our Facebook world friends. We appreciate you and all the work on behalf of survivors and families and folks impacted by violence across the state. So thank you.
Thank you so much thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next session.